I lied in the confessional. I was 8 years old, and all day I knew that I'd have to go to confession, and I dreaded it. My greatest desire was to please the adults in my life, my parents, my teachers, my priest. But I just simply could not think. I knew I was expected to be repentant, but I could not think of a sin I'd committed since my last confession. But I knew I had to have sinned. All through recess on the hard pavement of the church parking lot and all the way to the confessional, my brain searched for sin. But ultimately, I made something up. I can't really remember what it was that I said that I did, but I do remember that day. I remember hoping that the penance that I was given, a few Hail Marys and a few Our Fathers, was good enough to cover the sin I had just committed. Looking back on this now, it's with a touch of sadness and a bit more anger. I question not just the concept of sin, but the way that I was made to feel like a sinful being. This had pretty much been true since about the age of 7. I guess before then, baptism had me covered. But you see, Catholics believe that you are born in sin. And it wasn't clear to me exactly what that sin was, even after 12 years of parochial school religion classes. The nuns at Divine Redeemer, my elementary school, had warned us that our thoughts and our actions could be sinful if we didn't sit straight, listen, and follow God's commandments. But it always felt as if they believed that we would inevitably mess up because we were sinners. I wonder how different that time could have been had they stressed the original blessing instead of original sin. The original blessing of life, of the earth, of the people around us. My family, all 13 kids, didn't belong to Divine Redeemer Parish. We lived about 14 miles away, and we went to Holy Apostles Parish. These two churches could not have been more different. Divine Redeemer had hard wooden pews, kind of like the ones you're sitting in. At Holy Apostles, we had cushioned chairs. We had a guitar mass. We had amplifiers. So they sang and clapped and talked about bringing joy into the world. And there was joy there. But there was also sin, and we were reminded of that at every Mass. I considered myself Catholic, even with sparse attendance, until graduate school when I took a class in epistemology. How do we know what we know? Just asking this question and the fact that I could ask that question just blew my mind. Suddenly, all the irritations that I'd had with Catholicism became a full-blown rash. And mostly the role of women. The fact that women were blamed for and paid the price in blood and pain for the sins of the world. How any sexual misconduct was the woman's responsibility for not behaving properly. I really began to question my entire faith and whether or not I believed in original sin. I've considered these issues a lot over the years, and I can only conclude that the men of the early church were envious of women, of our ability to create life, mirroring the original creation of life. This was so threatening to them that they had to balance the act. So they used guilt and they used shame, and those are very powerful weapons. But now I can shed that interpretation. I am a woman. I am a creator of life, and I am a blessing. All of us are blessings to each other through our actions and simply in who we are. Changing the perspective to one of original blessing opens us up to truly be ourselves, to bless each other, to live in joy in our bodies and our relationships. But being a blessing also comes with some responsibility. How can we bless others? What in you is needed? Because this community, this city, this state, and goodness knows this country and this planet needs you. What I wish I could say to that 8-year-old girl who was searching for her sins is that she can stop searching. She can look at herself and she can see all that is blessed in her. Her kindness, her thoughtfulness, her passion, and her beauty. She is the product of love, and her gift is to share that love with the world.
I learned very early in life that something was different about me. The first example I have is from kindergarten. I tried enticing my classmates into joining my tomboy club, a club for girls who wanted to be boys. But despite my best efforts, I spent most of the recesses alone and remained the only member of the club for the rest of the year. By the time I was in middle school, I hit my full stature of 5'6" as a sixth grader. I weighed just under 150 pounds and could bench press as much. My nicknames became queer slurs, and I was referred to as It and Hulk on a regular basis. The bullying was merciless, and the fights, though almost always one-sided, not my side, were plentiful. The principal and the guidance counselor's offices felt like they had a revolving door for me. In high school, the bullying had settled down, but by then, I was getting very confusing crushes on both boys and girls. One minute, I was in love with Brent Van Camp from my local LDS ward, and the next minute, it was the muscular Kathleen Dawes from the girls' basketball team. Sadly, it was the late 90s, and I was living in Redneckville, Florida. So there weren't any examples of healthy queer folk happily living their lives. There was only Jesus. And despite his Birkenstock footwear, he was considered terminally single or secretly married to Mary Magdalene, depending on whether or not you wanted to reference Jesus Christ Superstar or your local Baptist minister. Life only got more confusing as I considered where to attend college. If I stayed in Florida, I would have a full ride scholarship, but considering how nightmarish my home life was, my internal feelings of self-preservation said I needed to do everything in my power to get the hell out of Florida. So as a Mormon child with straight A's, I made the obvious choice. BYU, 2,000 miles away from Florida. While I was there, I remained mostly closeted, with few exceptions, despite continuing to have genuine feelings for both men and women. Years passed. I moved back to Florida to teach for a few years, and then again back to Utah for grad school. And then in 2011, I was in Canada visiting family when I saw Chaz Bono on Dancing with the Stars. The way he described what it meant to be trans made my whole life start to make sense to me. Unfortunately, I was still very deeply entrenched in Mormonism. I knew I wasn't straight, but dealing with my gender identity felt like an impossible and an overwhelming situation. I held out. I was hoping I would find a husband who wouldn't be disgusted with me being incredibly masculine and a little bisexual. Once I knew who I was, however, it became harder and harder to pretend and isolate myself. I was experiencing gender dysphoria, anxiety, and depression. In January of 2015, I had top surgery, but still continued to attend LDS services and Relief Society, and refrained from starting testosterone. In November of that same year, the church announced its baptism exclusionary policy for children of same-gender parents. The suicides of people in my community skyrocketed. I felt acute despair. Then I was asked to attend a meeting with my stake president where he implied that the true cost of my salvation would be for me to not fully transition. I realized the doctrine of the church was not going to change for me, no matter what was necessary for me to stay safe and healthy. Obedience was more important to the leadership than my life. That conversation was the nail in my proverbial LDS coffin. In late 2016, I drove home to meet with my Zionist Mormon parents in Missouri to let them know that I was leaving the faith. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever experienced because I was still free to retain some sort of relationship with them, but it was made clear that I would be entirely disinherited. It was a difficult decision, yet I knew I couldn't spend their money or enjoy their farm if I was dead. The inheritance equated to blood money, my own blood, if I did what they asked. I finally left the faith and started testosterone in January 2016. From then on, the more I evolved into the man I knew myself to be, the easier my life became. Just 3 years later, I met my beautiful husband, Marco, and we began building our lives together. I recognize that not everyone will live the life of a queer trans man brought up in a bonkers religion. Nor are they hoping for the reward of a pocket-sized, sensitive, intelligent, bearded Latin lover, such as my husband. These gifts are for me. But what I do know is each one of us are put into positions throughout our lives that ask us to be something or someone we are not. It could be in a familial or romantic relationship, a profession, or in extracurricular pursuits. But pretending to be someone we're not is damaging and disconnecting, especially over time. The one thing I know works against this painful separation from humanity and ourselves is to accept ourselves and one another for exactly who or what we are. It is then that we can ultimately see our valuable interconnection and fill our lives with meaning.
When I arrived in the US for the first time 30 years ago this week, I threw up. It was not out of disgust, but because a rocky, dizzying landing at Anchorage International Airport had proved too rough for me, and I made full use of the brace position and the air sickness bag. My parents and I were on our way to New York City on a chilly November day, just after Bill Clinton, or in my 8-year-old mind, the dude who played saxophone on TV, was elected president. My father, a foreign service officer for Taiwan, had been assigned a 4-year term in New York, and my parents and I were about to spend years away from our family and friends. I was hoping to make friends at a new school, but in a language that I did not yet know, in a country where I had never lived, where I had never celebrated a birthday. Nervous and already nauseous, I stayed close to my parents and clung to a large, plump, stuffed giraffe, my carry-on item, and a farewell present from my teacher and classmates in Taipei. These were all the familiar bearings that I had left. Having no idea what awaited me, I got off the plane in an awful state, and with several more hours of flying to go, we were not there yet. During the layover, an old woman approached me in the airport's waiting lounge. I don't remember what she looked like or what she said to me in a low, comforting voice. Sensing that a young boy needed some cheering up, she leaned forward, looked into my bleary eyes, smiled, and offered me a small button, the size of a quarter, and with a cartoon moose on it. The moose was wearing a tuxedo, a red bow tie, and a tiny top hat between his antlers, and he danced cheerfully while holding a baton. I could not read the words at the button's edge, but I took delight in the jolly-looking moose, so I smiled back and managed a thank you, using one of the few English phrases that I knew. As I think back, so much was left unsaid in that fleeting but memorable encounter, my first with an American, and a stranger at that. The woman's gesture came from a place of thoughtfulness and sympathy. reaching out to a child who was transiting through an unfamiliar country, facing life in an unknown language, and feeling down. With instinctive kindness, she saw me and understood. And that button forged a bond of trust. This trust does not grow out of nowhere. It is a telling mark of community, connected, if not by common culture, then by a shared understanding of the need to offer kindness and comfort to those in distress. Community and connection were what allowed my family to trust and embrace the encounter. That someone in a different country, with a background and upbringing unknown to us, could see a distressed child, respond with a sense of closeness rather than distance, and honor that child's presence, honor my presence, by seeking to alleviate distress. It takes a community to sow the seeds that grow into such thoughtful acts, to keep cultivating the soil that nurtures and allows them to flourish. Trust elevates us. It is holy because it is exchanged and paid forward, ever widening in its reach. What has been extended to us, we are then able to extend to others, to build, renew, and regenerate community. 30 years ago, during an election month, I trusted this newfound American welcome with a moose who was wild about Anchorage, as I later learned to read. As another election looms, our tense, divided political climate makes me wonder how we maintain and renew our communities. I sense that the country is in transition, away from what I've known these 30 Novembers. I am an immigrant, and I cannot vote. All I can do is to trust fellow members of my community to vote, to make decisions that acknowledge and honor those who are vulnerable rather than reject and repress them. I hold out hope for decisions that foster trust by paying forward the refuge, security, and relief that one has known, whether with the blessing of justice or the balm of due dignity. In voting, there is an act of stewardship on behalf of the entire community. Familiar and strange, human and animal, lake and mountain, air, water, salt, and rock. Decades have passed, and I have kept the dancing moose button because I strive to put trust forward in our communities and let it elevate and amplify what we hold most dear. This week, it's up to you.